following is a presentation of DangerZone Productions.
In 1993, Nintendo came out with a brand new RPG for their Super Nintendo console. That RPG was Shadowrun, a game based on the popular tabletop game by the same name. A game similar to Dungeons & Dragons, being that it used dice, but with a little bit of a twist, being that it used technology and, surprisingly, magic. And yes, they did incorporate these same aspects into the game. The end result was a game unlike anything most gamers had seen as of yet. Most RPGs at the time, you've got to keep in mind, were mostly sword and sorcery, but this one, having a modern twist on it, definitely caught a lot of people's eyes. And really, a lot of the gameplay played like a point-and-click adventure game, being that you even had to use a targeting crosshair when you fired your guns. The story for the game was pretty good and had a good bit of mystery and depth to it, I suppose. You play a character named Jake, who's a Shadowrunner, basically, and pretty much the whole span of the game is trying to figure out who Jake is, who wants him dead, and why the information stored in his brain is so important. And it sounds like a movie that we saw once before, don't it? A ripoff! Sorry about that, I must have had something caught in my throat. Anyway, in 1994, Sega came along and decided to try their hand at making their adaptation of Shadowrun, and thus, a release on the Sega Genesis was created. Unfortunately, it bombed pretty hard. So the question is, why did the Sega Genesis release of Shadowrun bomb so quickly? I mean, the original on the SNES wasn't necessarily what I'd call a bad game, which granted, I never really got a chance to play the Shadowrun game on the SNES until much later on when I was a teenager, thanks to console classics. And to be honest, even then, I had no idea that there was a release on the Sega Genesis. So, my question is this. If the original Shadowrun wasn't what you would call a bombing letdown, why did the Sega Genesis version do so bad? I say we take a look and find out. So here's what I got so far as the story goes. The game takes place in the year 2058, where a strange phenomenon known as the Awakening has suddenly allowed magic back into the world. The Awakening. Is that kind of like the Quickening from Highlander? The game takes place in the city of Seattle, which kind of blows my mind considering that even though it's supposed to be in Seattle, there's elves, dwarves, and trolls running around. Maybe when they say Seattle, they're actually meaning, you know, Seattle, a suburb of Middle-earth. Could be, you never know. But back to the storyline. You play a character named Josh, who has nothing to do with Jake from the NES game. He is in Seattle because he just saw some video footage of his brother Mike, who is a Shadowrunner, getting gunned down in the street by some unknown assassins. He goes to the hotel where his brother was staying to try and check out his stuff to see if maybe there's some answers, only to be told by the douchey hotel owner that, well, turns out Mike's not very good at paying his bills.
Son of a must pay.
And it looks like the only chance you've got of taking a look at Mike's stuff is to pay his hotel bill. Okay, so how do you do that? Simple. You become a Shadowrunner, of course. Go around doing jobs and getting paid for said jobs. This is where the game, I find, gets a little tough. Be prepared to get aggravated very quickly, as you are going to die, and die a lot. Your character starts out as a complete I mean, he gets slapped around a couple of times, boom, drops dead. And I found that that's the case regardless of which class you choose, whether you choose to be a samurai, a decker, or a Gator Shaman? What the f***? A Gator Shaman? What the hell is a Gator Shaman? I mean, the other two classes are completely natural. I can understand what they are. You know, a samurai is a samurai, and a decker, I assume, is probably a techno guy. As long as it's not one of these guys from Saints Row the Third. But a Gator Shaman. You couldn't have just said a shaman because, you know, everybody who's played games like this knows what a shaman is. No, you had to throw the word gator in there and completely knock me for a loop and leave me completely dumbfounded as to what the hell you're talking about. I'm sorry, I hate to dwell on this, but you can't just call something a Gator Shaman and just assume people are going to accept that and be like, oh, okay, it's a Gator Shaman. No, you need to explain this to me, game, because I'm a little dumbfounded. What the is a Gator Shaman? Is it a half-human, half-gator person who has magical powers? Is it what kind of voodoo is coming out of Louisiana nowadays? Hell, you could tell me that this guy was a Gator Shaman and I'd accept it.
BillyWitchDoctor.com work mostly in chicken.
At least then I'd have some kind of visual aid to assist me in this. Gator Shaman. It's going to be one of those kinds of games, isn't it?
Weird-ass subclasses aside, let's talk about some of the positive things about this game. Unlike the original Shadowrun, this game allows you to have up to 2 extra companions with you, which, trust me, comes in handy. A lot. Plus, unlike the SNES version, you don't have to scroll around with a point-and-click thing. Instead, you get an auto-target, which is a big help when it comes to shooting people. The only quarrel I have with it is you have to be facing exactly towards the enemy, which is not as easy as it sounds. Your character has to pull a complete U-turn in order to face somebody. And considering a lot of the enemies you're going to fight at the beginning of the game are close-range fighters, by the time you finally turn around to shoot them, they're going to be all up in your grill by the time you go to pull your gun on them. Another similarity between this game and the SNES version is that if you choose the Decker class, you're able to go into the Matrix.
Whoa.
All you gotta do is find yourself a computer and jack in. Next thing you know, you'll be... Oh no. Oh dear God, no. No! Josh is playing the Silver Surfer video game!
Oh my God!
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Is it gone? Thank God. Whew. Last thing we need is remnants of that stain showing up in this review. Where was I? Oh yeah, Shadowrun. I remember now. After you get Michael's stuff out of the hotel, the story branches off into 3 separate parts, each one leading up to the big climax at the end. And yes, you have to complete all 3 storylines in order to get to the end of the game. Each storyline, from what I understand, helps you to understand the 3 questions that are asked in the game. What was Michael's last Shadowrun? Who killed him? And why? Now, as far as this whole pseudo-Scientology sort of plot, I've meticulously pieced together what exactly it means, and here's what I've got. Apparently, years before Michael died, there was this elven hero named Alicia. And after he died, his body was sealed in a tomb with a bunch of magical trinkets to keep him out of the wrong hands. Thus enters an evil spirit known as Thrawn. Apparently Thrawn is a free spirit, which is a cursed spirit. I don't really get it myself. But apparently he wants to break into Alicia's tomb, steal his power, become a physical spirit, and of course, take over the world.
Of course!
To assist him in his plans, Thrawn uses 2 Johnsons.
Good night, everybody.
One of these Johnsons, known as Vigore, Vigore, not Falgore, and he uses this megacorp called Renneku, some Japanese name. But it turns out that this megacorp has plans of their own. They plan to control Thrawn so that they can take over the world.
Of course!
By this point, a Sin Search council member named Harlequin sets out to stop Thrawn. He gets his apprentice, Frosty, to hire a bunch of Shadowrunners to destroy Alicia's tomb. And it just turns out one of these Shadowrunners was Michael. But unfortunately, the Megacorp found out about this, and Mr. Johnson sends a strike team to wipe them all out, leaving Mr. Harlequin powerless. And thus, that's where the plot comes from. Eventually, after you complete the 3 main storylines, your quest finally leads you to Harlequin, who in turn leads you to the tomb for the final showdown of the game.
You get to the final room in the back of the tomb where it seems Thrawn has finally taken on a human form. You smack him around like a hoe for a few minutes until Falcor comes in here and tells you to seal off the dungeon for good so that he can never escape. So you do. Look at that thing, it looks like a mutated Alf. And that's the end of the game.
As far as RPGs go, I wouldn't necessarily call Shadowrun a bad game. Don't get me wrong, it's needlessly complex in a lot of ways. The controls can feel a little stiff at times, the aiming controls could be better, and like I said, there are parts of it they could dumb down for younger gamers. But calling it a bad game? I think that might be pushing the envelope a little bit. I don't really see why this game didn't do good on its release. Maybe people, didn't get into the SNES version, and maybe that had a rippling effect down to the Sega Genesis version, but, that's gaming politics. That's to be expected. If you want to sell a good game, you have got to market it. You have got to show people what it's got, what it doesn't have, as far as good stuff goes, and more importantly, you got to play to the demographic. That's what gets people hooked. Nowadays, with the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and I guess the Nintendo Wii, people know how to market their games. That's how we get hooked on them, and thus how we buy them to play. Apparently Sega didn't learn from this, and that's why the game did kind of poorly. As far as Shadowrun goes, it's a good series, and it's actually a really fun tabletop game. I myself have played it once or twice, and I enjoyed it every time I played it. If you're a fan of the tabletop game, you should give this game a try. It definitely feels like a throwback to the dice rolling days of yore, so to speak. Bottom line, Shadowrun is definitely worth a pickup, whether you're playing it on the Sega Genesis or whether you're playing it on the Super Nintendo. And believe it or not, there's actually a release on the Xbox 360. I know this because I bought it. Unfortunately, the Xbox 360 version was only meant to be a multiplayer online game. And by the time I bought it, nobody was playing it. Yeah, I know. There's $30 I'll never see again. Anyway, thanks for joining me here on the Danger Zone. I'm Danny South, saying, keep on running. Yeah.